Hello, and welcome to I Am Dad podcast with your fatherhood authority, Kenneth Braswell. 30 minutes of wisdom, information, resources, and nuggets to help you on your fatherhood journey. Or maybe you're just curious and want to hear some real talk about fatherhood, family, and the minds of men. Well, guess what? We got you too. Sit back, grab your pad and pen, and maybe even bring a little something to sip on. Enjoy 30 straight minutes of fatherhood, family, and fun with the Fatherhood Authority, Kenneth Braswell.
Welcome to I Am Dad podcast. I'm your host, Kenneth Braswell. Thank you for joining us for another episode. We are continuing to, this year has been extremely phenomenal. 4 years running. I've often said to all of you that when I first started this podcast, I really thought this thing was going to be a fad. I was going to do it for a year, get bored with it, and move on to something else. And here we are in year 4. And there was a point in this last year that I thought I was running out of guests. And it was like, nothing could be further from the truth. I am a low-level LinkedIn stalker. I kind of watch people on LinkedIn. I watch them for a while. I watch their work. I watch what it is they're doing. And so often, I just come across phenomenal people and just watching their work and watching what they're doing and watching their voices and just desperately dying to kind of meet them, like our guest today, who is David Mandel. He is internationally recognized as an expert on domestic violence and child safety and the creator of the groundbreaking Safe and Together model. As the founder of the Safe and Together Institute, David has spent over 2 decades reshaping the child welfare systems, courts, and community response to domestic violence by focusing on perpetrators' behaviors and refusing to blame mothers. His new book, Stop Blaming Mothers and Ignoring Fathers, challenges the status quo and offers a blueprint for systems that center the safety and dignity of children and adult survivors while holding perpetrators accountable as parents. Today, David is going to share his insights on fatherhood, responsibility, and what it takes to truly keep families safe and together. How you doing, my friend?
Good, Ken. Thanks for having me on the show.
No, thanks for being here. Listen, we start our show off the same with every guest, and I hit him with this. Don't ask me how to answer the question, just answer it. And we simply ask people to just tell us your daddy story.
My daddy's story. Well, first thing I have to think about right now is my father who just passed at 96 years old.
Sorry to hear that, but goodness, 96,
Yeah,
that was a great long life.
96. And he was sharp cognitively to the end. Physically, he had declined. He passed with his family around him, his wife. He died. They were married 69 years and a day.
Wow.
They died the day after their anniversary, the 69th anniversary. Raised 3 children, successful, happy children, myself, my brother, my sister. And I guess the daddy part of that, aside from the fact he's my father who passed, is he was not noteworthy except, and I mean this, I don't mean any degradation, he was a decent man. I think, because of the work I do, people think I grew up with domestic violence. It's the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with a very decent man who loved my mother, who was dedicated, who never said a bad word about her and never said a bad word about women in general. And so in that way, he was so deeply my role model. And he bore the fruits, those last moments. He had his family, he had his grandkids, he had his kids, his great grandkids around him, and he died in peace. So that's the first thing that comes to mind, Ken. Is not my story as a dad, but my story about my dad.
That's awesome. I love that. You said something in there that just really struck me about like why you got into this work and the assumption on why you got in here. I'm a little bit opposite in the sense that fatherlessness is kind of what drove me into this space. But what I've kind of learned, David, over the years, and that is the father fullness story is just as powerful as the fatherlessness story. And that is the story that has to be amplified. It has to be amplified that you have a narrative that I can learn from. I remember one of my staff people, we were going out speaking around the country, and James and I were standing together at this presentation. And we were all going up and telling our stories, and he was standing next to me. He said, "Man," he says, "I don't really feel like I should be here." He says, "I don't really have a story." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He said, "Like all of you guys, didn't have your fathers in your life." He says, "Not only did I have my father," he says, "but I had my grandfather and my great grandfather all live within like 3 blocks of my house." And he said, "So I don't have the same story." And I said, "Brother," I was like, "that story is more powerful than our story, because what your story explains is why our story is so painful."
Mm. I've been thinking a lot about, there's this resurgent conversation about men and fathers and boys, I think publicly for a lot of different reasons. And I think what I'm seeing again is sort of this more of, and you may have been seeing it all along, this absent father narrative, right? This absent
Mhm,
father. And I'm not satisfied with that narrative for a lot of reasons. One is the reason why you're saying it. Two is it really kind of puts the problem and solution on the idea of, oh, having a man in the house is the answer. Well, we know in these houses that are fatherless or absent father, there's a very involved father down the street. He's just not living
mm,
in the home right now.
mhm,
Or in another family, or a very involved stepfather or a boyfriend or a grandfather or other male figures. Or there's, in families where the father is there, the father's violent and abusive and is taking, not giving overall.
mhm,
But I think we need to unpack these narratives and these terms we use in that way. And it really, it hurts the fathers who are parenting the best they can from prison,
right,
or or want to be a dad, but and are involved as much as they can be, but because it was because of her, they were teen parent. These stories. They were teen parents, and it was her mother or her family that didn't want him around. Not that he
mhm,
didn't want to be around, but they didn't want him around. And so
right,
we got to get past these simplistic ideas and really get into these stories
mhm,
like that. And I guess what I would say is one of my biggest lessons over the last 40 years with the work is that we've built systems and have a culture that don't understand that fathers, and each bit of this matters to me. And if you want to unpack it, I can. It's in the book. Fathers' choices and behaviors matter, to good or bad, to the
mhm,
functioning of families, to the functioning of children, and to the functioning of their partner. And
right,
I think a lot of times it's for me, it's not about where you live.
right,
It's about, or if you're in the home or not, it's about how you act. It's and the impact your actions have. And we have systems that kind of act like men's behaviors are invisible, whether he's watching, his child while she goes to work that second shift.
mhm,
So she's working so she can work and make some extra money, or it's he's being abusive to her in front of the kids. But
mhm.
they're part of the same equation for me.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, I think that, I think that the struggle that society has is the narrative up against the experiences.
hmm.
And we wanna pick which experiences we wanna talk about
Mm-hmm.
to confirm our narrative,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yep.
that's not the way to solution.
Right.
The way to solution is really understanding the totality of experiences, right? And so when I first saw your book and I saw the title, because I'm literal, David, when it comes to things. And I think that people are intentional on why they use particular words,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so when I saw your book and it was like, stop blaming mothers, I couldn't even get to the ignoring fathers because I was stuck on like, what does he mean by stop blaming, moms? That's not part of the DV narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I first got into this responsible fatherhood work now some 21 years ago, one of the biggest things with the federal grants that they were mandated to do is to have a DV advisor on all grants.
Mm-hmm.
There is a huge push from the DV community not to
Mm.
do responsible fatherhood programs because their concern was around the safety of moms.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being in New York State. I was the director of the New York State Fatherhood Initiative at the time. And I remember having to go around the state talking to DV agencies and DV leaders about what it was we were trying to do. But as a result of that, I got to sit in on a lot of conversations and support groups and talk to moms and hear that narrative and story. And I think for my career, that was good for me because that sunk in my heart and it gave
Mm-hmm.
me the words to kind of talk about this work and the necessity of the work that I'm doing specifically because of what you're saying. And
Mm-hmm.
so I always, as a result of that, I came up with this phrase and I want to throw it out at you. Tell me what you think about this. And then I want to flow into your work.
Mm-hmm.
I would always say to them, we are clear and we don't want to generate unsafe homes. We are also clear that 95% of all domestic violence incidents are perpetrated by men. However, all men are not domestic violence perpetrators.
Right. That's right.
Like
That's
if
right.
we, right?
That's
Is
right.
that
That's
right?
right. That's right. That's right. And I've been writing a little bit even further, which we can even talk about, which is not only are men the predominant perpetrators of violence against women and girls, they're predominant perpetrators against other men and boys.
Mm,
I mean, so if we're talking about men's health, we could go there as well. But I completely agree with you, and that's why for me, uh, I was really clear when I started. So I'll tell you a little bit of my background and,
hmm
and how I got into this, because I think it'll help make sense of it. Um, you and I were talking before the show started about being from Brooklyn, and I grew up, we're probably close to the same age. I don't know, but we grew up at a time when New York was really dangerous, like 4,000 murders a year. It's really
Oh,
kind of
absolutely. I
right,
remember those
right.
days.
Yeah,
Hmm
right. 70s, 80s,
Yes.
right. And then I left for I was born and raised in Brooklyn. For the audience, you didn't hear this. Like that was my experience. Cross street, 800 square foot row house,
hmm
post war, cross street from the projects. Like
hmm
that was what I knew. That was my environment.
hmm
And and then I went to Connecticut to go to college, and I thought I was being let out of prison. I thought there was no crime. Ken, you could relate to this. I thought there was no crime in Connecticut.
Right.
I thought everything was like sunflower and roses but that was really like, it's hard to wrap my mind around that today as a grown man. But as a young man, I really thought I was leaving prison, because I was
Right.
walking down the street at night. You walk in the middle of the street, who's between the cars, who's over there, like,
hmm
and I'm sure you can relate to it. There's a
Yes.
constant vigilance. You're outside. You're on the
hmm
so anyway. Um, so I had this personal, talk about lived experience. I had this personal experience of freedom.
hmm
But the university I went to, the college I went to, they had a public safety van and safety rides, and all of a sudden I started learning that my female friends or girlfriends, they were not feeling as safe as I was.
mm
They were having a different lived experience than I was, and that
Mhm,
they were afraid of violence from men. That's and so for me, it became this question, and I still can't tell you why. Maybe my dad, maybe my mom. But what does this mean to me as a man? I didn't push it away. I listened.
mm,
I digested it. I thought about it. And then I heard a story on the news out of St. Louis, men marching against male violence against women, and something clicked into place. Ken, it's 40 years later. My whole life's been built around it in many ways. I said,
mm,
"Oh, that's other men who have a solution or doing something about this. They're not sitting on the sidelines, they're taking action."
mhm,
And that took me to activism on campus. My first real job, where I was working with men arrested, this is 1986 in or late 80s in Connecticut, where the first uh, uh, um, arrest with probable cause law was passed in the United States. We started doing groups. I was in that first crowd of folks doing it. So that's where I started. And for me, I guess what you said really resonates. What I came to understand was I had to be committed to the safety and well-being of victims, usually women. And I was sitting with men who had used violence, been controlling, but I needed to interact with them with respect, see them as whole people. My goal was to try to help them uplift themselves. And that kind of attitude, that kind of combination of ultimately the primary goal here is safety for those family members.
Absolutely.
But you need to do it in a way where, and this is what survivors want, by the way. This is what their kids want. This is what communities want. I can go to Australia where we work in, and First Nation Aboriginal folks will say, we love the safety of the model because you treat our men who have been colonized, who have been beaten down, you talk about them as fathers, not as offenders, not as just criminals in the system, but you see their place in our community and our families. And that's why this model can relate to us 12,000, 10,000 miles away, because that same value is important there as it is here.
Yeah, when you walk into this work, did you feel like you were accepted into the space, or did you have to kind of work yourself into it where your voice would have some level of credibility?
I think that the work with men in general deserves a suspicion, to be honest,
Okay.
because it's such tough work, and it's really easy for people to forget what the primary mission, when you're working with men who've been violent or controlling their families, the primary mission has to be that actually the safety of the people who are not in the room. Now, there's
Right.
lots of ways you can get there, but I think everybody should be skeptical of those. If I'm sitting with a guy who's good at telling lies in the moment, or and think about addicts, or think about anybody who's got, they're good at sort of spinning themselves as victims potentially, and making somebody else to blame, whether it's the cops or their partner or their parents. And your goal is to hold them responsible. I don't want to say accountable, hold them responsible, and to give them traction. Like, I really this is so important to me. This is about him and his mental health. This is about his balance. This is about his connections. Even if he's been through the most horrible things in his life, and I can have empathy for that, he's not healing his past by hurting somebody else. That's not helping him.
Right.
And so for me, I think I was met with skepticism, because the work should be met with skepticism. It wasn't personal. I needed to do a lot of listening, like you did. I needed to still do listening. My partner Ruth, who's a co-owner of my business, we're co-hosts of a podcast. We work together. She's a survivor, and she's public about that, so I'm not telling stories about that. I need to hear her anger at the system. So I think that we need to, any of us, and I'm saying whether it's men, whether it's professionals, we could talk about anything really. We need to accept it, distrust.
Yeah. I think for me, it was my story had to find a space in the narrative too. The transference of my story, though, was being a little boy, watching my mom being abused by my stepfather and being powerless to do anything about that. I don't know if you've read Will Smith's book, Will.
I haven't yet. No, I read
Ah,
Trevor. I read
David,
Trevor
goodness.
Noah talks. Trevor Noah talks about, for instance, about being. I read about him being a kid in South Africa, watching his dad be violent. I haven't read Will Smith's book. So anyway, go ahead. I
Yeah,
know.
it explains
Yeah.
the slap. It explains a lot.
Oh, okay.
His
Yeah,
thing
yeah, yeah, yeah.
he throughout his life, he has always felt um accountable for not saving his mom,
I get it.
protecting his mom, not
Yeah,
saving
yeah,
her,
yeah, yeah,
protecting
yeah,
his
yeah,
mom.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so throughout his life, his knight in shining armor on the white horse was, I have always got to be strong enough and be
Right,
in protection of the women in my life,
right, right.
which is, so the transference for me was that kid. It
Yeah,
was,
yeah.
no, I was not abused directly, but I was in full view of abuse and wasn't old enough to respond and do what I needed to do. So I understand it from a different perspective. I
Yeah.
don't understand it fully, but I understand it. So I love what you're saying about like really listening and to men, because what we don't take into consideration, I don't think, is that the trauma as a result of whatever you've gone through and whatever you've done in life is something that has to be addressed even when it's not condoned.
That's right. The trauma needs to be understood. And I don't, here in that, that context for Will Smith, does put another light on him protecting Jada in his mind and standing up for her. And I generally don't comment on public things because there's so much you don't see and don't
Yeah.
know. But just to kind
Right.
of go down that road for a second with you, you can see how there was nothing about or there was so much. Let's put it this way: I don't want to speak for him, but there's so much about that doing that while it's understandable was not helpful to him, to his
Right.
mental health, to his
Right.
relationships, to his connections, right? So we can understand, we can empathize, we can appreciate, um but not condone, like you said, and have a real clear line that both speaks to the right of other people to be safe,
Mm-hmm.
and how when you act out that way, you not only harm those other people, but really we need to strengthen that narrative. You harm yourself.
Right.
You're not going to get more safety in your life. You're not going to get more love. You're not going to get more stability. You're not going to get more connection. You're not going to get a future with your kids. You're not going, you're doing, if you think that, oh, this is, and I think sometimes the argument focused on what's should be, it's about what's being taken away from those other people. So other people are losing things.
Mm.
So there's a focus on, well, he's gaining her compliance. He's gaining her listening. He's gaining. It is because what happens is I'm actually trying to fix my anxiety, my helplessness, my fear, my
Mm-hmm.
by doing this to you, by making you keep the kids quiet so I can sleep, even if it's middle of the day
Mm-hmm.
and the kids are normally making noise. If I terrorize you into keeping the kids quiet, yes, maybe I get to sleep. Yes, they're terrorized into compliance. But at the end of the day, you as the person doing that lose so much more, but you may not see it.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. The other
Uh
thing too is, the in the extension of this story, my defining moment with my stepfather at then, I believe I was like 15, is getting into a tussle with him in his house and him putting me into a headlock and me attempting to, as a result, attempting to throw him out the window. Thank God when I lunged back, my foot slipped and we both fell down at the base of the
mm,
window.
mhm.
But what I said when I felt was the thing that lingers in my mind and confirms to me that I was acting out on behalf of the little boy in me. And I yelled at him, "You're not going to beat me like you beat my mother."
Sure, that's right. That's right. It's what I want to say, Ken, and you know this, but for your audience, that this is such a common story. It's it's maybe the most common story of child abuse in the sense of we think 25%, and I think that's low in the US, by the way, are kids who are quote unquote witnessing. And I don't use that language, but it's what the common language,
Hmm.
domestic abuse, right, in their homes.
Hmm.
Australia, they did a population based study recently. 40%, of Australian adults reported they experienced observing and being exposed to domestic violence as a child. 40%.
Mm-hmm.
It was the most common maltreatment ahead of everything: sexual abuse, physical abuse. And we know that the results are very similar to those forms of abuse, even just quote unquote being exposed. And our juvenile justice system and our correction system, you're in that moment, you're a heartbeat away from being in the juvenile justice system. Because forget
Right.
what he did before.
Right.
Neighbor calls the cops, he calls the cops on you.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to a juvenile probation officer. I said, what's the intersection of domestic abuse exposure and kids on your juvenile probation caseload? This was just one person off the cuff.
Mm-hmm.
She said 25% of the kids, the boys, on my probation caseload are there for actively protecting their mother. That was her down and dirty, quick assessment, right? And that could have been you
Right.
easily.
Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. And
it, it,
and then the backdrop, David, is that like it's a rabbit trail, right? Because in those moments, he never gets to tell his story. Like I don't know what his trauma is, and I don't know where his trauma came from, and I don't know where the trauma before that came from. And I don't know how much
right.
of this has compiled on top of each other, right? And so to your point, you got to be in the moment, and being in the moment means listening.
And I'll tell you a story, okay? About listening and how important it is to me, and how I hope I'm still learning. I think I still am, but it's
Mhm.
about this particular case is really understand the intersection. And again, Australia is an interesting kind of experience for me because I get
Mhm.
to go as a little more of an observer outside the culture and a little more of an active learner,
Mhm.
and go there. And unfortunately, with such a shared history, of colonization or racism,
Mhm.
you with the U.S. and so there's a lot of mirroring. There's a lot of
Mhm.
like, they talk about deaths in custody there, so it's less likely, kind of, they have less of the police shootings of civilians, but
Right.
they'll talk about deaths in custody of Aboriginal men and women,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so I work closely with a lot of First Nation folks. We've done some projects with them and around domestic abuse in their communities and how to apply the model there. But I was working with some folks, and they said, "Look, we just had this man who's Aboriginal assault his female partner, who's also Aboriginal, and so law enforcement was stepping in. I don't know the nuts and bolts of this, but the way they told the story is, and the women in the community banded around him. So here is a guy who beat a woman in the community, but they said we banded around him to protect him from law enforcement.
Wow.
And they said, and we did that, and that unfortunately he didn't stop his abuse. We also confronted him on his abuse, but he didn't
Mhm.
stop his abuse. And a younger version of me would have seen that as collusion and wouldn't have
Mhm.
really understood the context around race and racism and colonization. In that moment, it was one of the moments where I really felt like I heard something that I hadn't that had been said to me before, to be honest, but I was hearing it in a new way, which was, oh, I get it. You're dealing with the realities that he's in danger. He's one of you. He's part of your community. You're connected to him, even though he's been violent. And this is the imminent threat right now. The imminent threat
Mhm.
is he getting arrested, being incarcerated maybe for years, losing everything, maybe being beaten, maybe being killed in prison. And so the priority is protecting him from the system. That doesn't mean
Mhm.
his behavior is okay.
Right.
And I just, so to me, that's, when you say listening, and listening is important to me, as somebody who's not Aboriginal,
Right.
who presents as white to the world,
Mhm.
you know, I want to keep listening. I want to listen to survivors of all sorts. I want to listen to different experiences.
Right.
And, I think it's one of the things that as a dad, and I think as men, that we don't always get coached into listening. maybe
Right.
to make it more general.
Yeah. But also um complete empathy sits in there too, right? It's not just listening, but you have to be somewhat empathetic in totality, not just to the person you're listening to, but to the person who's being impacted by who you're listening to.
It's you obviously looked at my book, and you keep bringing up themes that are adjacent to my book, and I really appreciate it. Yeah, no, it's great. No, that's super. No, because we didn't even touch on the myths, which we talked about the lived experience. And I gotta, but I talk about, and it's so funny because I think about President Obama, who talks about empathy as being
Hmm.
so powerful, right? And I would have I I think empathy actually is really interesting because I think it's so critical. And I, to have people like Elon Musk and others say that empathy is the downfall of Western
Mm-hmm.
civilization, it just makes me sick to my stomach. Let's be super clear about that,
Hmm.
because I don't think that's even a dog whistle. Like I don't even know what they'd call that, but but we have to really understand that empathy isn't sufficient. Empathy means actually understanding and caring about the person, because what we find is that some people learn more and then use it against
Mm-hmm.
the other person
Hmm.
or use it to put themselves above them.
Hmm.
Knowledge of somebody's experience doesn't mean that you're going to intimacy, and we've seen this throughout American history. Intimacy doesn't mean equality. Intimacy doesn't mean safety. Intimacy doesn't mean it's how people choose to use that information and that knowledge. And so what we know with like abuse is my knowledge of you makes me a more powerful, gives me powerful tools to use against you.
Mm.
So there's something else
Yeah.
in there. Like when we define empathy, it's not just a simple listening or understanding of somebody else's. I can understand your experience and use it against you. I can find your soft spot
Hmm.
and turn that. And that's why domestic abuse is so hard for people to understand, because I have intimate knowledge of you. You told me
Right.
your secrets.
Right.
I control, like if you talk about your, if I can say, your like your stepdad, I pay the rent. I control your insurance. I may control
Right.
your transportation. I control who comes in and out of the house. I know the things you like. I know your favorite food. I know the names you don't like being called. I know the names you like being called. So this is what people always, they think about technology. I know your passwords. You
Yeah.
and I use the same computer. Like, do you mean like we want to talk
Yeah.
about like power?
Right.
Power, knowledge is power.
Right.
But knowledge also can be a pathway to love. Knowledge can be a pathway to connection. So it's not the knowledge, it's how you use it. And so empathy to me is really about that using, that choice to
Hmm.
care about the person and value them. And I think a lot of times people are working against culture, hierarchies, racism, stuff like that, sexism. Like, I know you, but I don't value you. So I'm going to use this information against you.
Yeah. When it comes to when you sat down to start thinking about the safe and together model,
Yeah.
like I'm sure you and Ruth was kind of thinking about these kind of long-term goals and what you ultimately wanted to do for a safe community and a safe world, those kinds of things. But you had to attack something at
Yeah.
first. Like,
Yeah.
what were you focused on in the beginning?
It started with me years ago when I started doing work with perpetrators, and then realized that other folks were working with perpetrators, probation, mental health, courts, child protection, but didn't know the first thing about them. And
Mm,
then got involved working with child protection, and the safety of the model came up at that point. It's about 20 years old. We're celebrating about a 20-year anniversary next year. And I put together, and talk about lived experience. It wasn't come out of a book, but it's come out of hundreds of conversations with social workers and with family members and survivors and perpetrators. And you talk to social workers, particularly, who are working with these families, and many of them were poor families, from different backgrounds. And I'd say, well, what did the dad do? What was, this case came in because dad got violent with mom. What did dad do? Well, he got arrested. That's not what he did.
mm,
Tell me what he did. Well, he got arrested before. Okay. I hear that he got arrested. We've had an open case. Describe to me his behavior. Well, they couldn't. Describe to me the risk he presents to you. Do you know if he's violent to other people besides family members? I have no idea. So what I found was they couldn't describe the actual person's behavior, right? Not what they look like, not whether they were arrested, how the system was taught to them, but was how dangerous was this guy? What was the harm? And so the model was built piece by piece out of my conversations with survivors, my conversations with some with young people, some with men themselves, research, talking to advocates, working with workers and saying, where are the holes in this? And the hole was basically people were treating the symptoms. In the child protection setting, a boyfriend, a dad would get violent, and all the casework would be about the mother's depression, parenting deficits, and why she wouldn't leave the relationship and her trauma history. I'm like, wait a second. You got a dad here. He's the biological father. He's got legal rights. He's around. And you just think because the court ordered him out of the house for 2 weeks or 6 months, he's no longer a factor. He's no longer scaring her. He's no longer the dad. You act like all those things are true when they're not true. He's still the dad. He still has access. He's still creating fear. He still can be changed. He still can be helped to be a better dad. And his behavior is the reason why this case is open in the first place. But you're talking about mom's depression and how she won't go to, or why she won't trust you. Well, she won't trust you because you're not showing that you understand the basics of the situation, which is his behavior, not hers.
Right.
That is why you're showing up in these people's house every day or every week or, you know. So I just wanted to give people a framework to do that right, to do that as effectively, to do it with as much justice and care as they could. And then when Ruth and I joined forces about 10 years ago, she just deepened, she deepened the survivor's voice. She deepened the sort of social justice analysis. She came out of a very violent institutional background that really kind of aligns, unfortunately, with a lot of the Christian nationalism that's going on right now, but directly related to it. So she had a lot of, just real deep perspective and experience and a real commitment to making sure survivors' voices were heard. So she wrote our ally guide. She started the podcast. She created that. And just kind of really has helped as a great strategic thinker and has really brought that forward in the work so much.
Yeah, I just interviewed not too long ago a young man from Germany. Started a program called Hope for Men to help raise the voices of men and boys who've been victims of sexual assault. And listening to you and I feel like I got a kinship with you right now. We think the same way when it comes to it. So like when I started Fathers Incorporated and all the work that I have around it, it wasn't because I had a whole library of books or I got a bunch of letters behind my name. It was from lived experience, knowing what people were thinking, knowing what they were saying, knowing what they were feeling, and trying to go at those things, right? To deal with those things first. And I'll figure out all of the evidence and research around it when I get there. But I know what my heart is telling me, and I know what my lived experience is telling me. I don't need to know the stat on what's happening when I'm looking at it in real time, on the ground, with people. Is it that keeps you motivated each and every day to just keep pushing, keep expanding, keep going deep in and broader?
I feel amazed and blessed that the model, we have 500 certified trainers globally now. If you ask me, we estimate we trained 50,000 professionals in the last year. The book has sold thousands of copies and just been translated to Dutch and is being translated to Japanese as I speak. It should come out, I'm going to the Netherlands to present, on this for a week in November. What keeps me going is the fact that this seems to make a difference, both to professionals who say, David, talking to you makes me realize I'm smarter than I thought I was. That to me is one of the most best comments I could get. I don't need you to think I'm smart. I want you to think you're smart. I want you to think that, because when I do consults with workers, the first thing I'll say to them is, tell me what you're doing right in this case. They go, what do you mean? It's got all these problems in it. Tell me what you're doing right in this case, what you've learned. Or I'll say to them, you know a lot, which means that you did something to build trust. So that keeps me going. Survivors who tell me I feel seen by your work every time I speak, there'll be survivors that come up in the audience and say, have my book. I was in Scotland and they're holding up the book and say, could you sign this? Because it spoke so much to them. That's what keeps me going, is that kind of feedback and knowing that the kid I'm never going to meet, that you as a kid, I'm never going to meet him. Maybe as adult someday, like I'm meeting you. But I'm never going to meet that kid in Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Saskatchewan, Scotland, Highland, like wherever we are, we're everywhere in those places. That I'm not going to meet them. But the idea that his life may be a little bit safer, that his protective parent gets a little more support, that maybe his dad, because people do it right, can become a better dad.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I've heard
Yes.
so many amazing stories still. And this is not everybody necessarily, but I've seen men who have been abusive and hearing from their family, not just from papers, hearing from their kids say he's different.
Right. Yes.
And that's real. I believe that. I've seen it. I've worked with men like that.
Yeah.
That keeps me going too.
Yeah.
And meeting
We
great people like you. I mean,
yeah.
seriously. So
Same here.
yeah,
We got to stay connected. We coming towards the end.
yeah.
And I haven't even scrolled up on my questions. We've been sitting right in this first three things that I want to talk about, but I
All
do
right.
want to bring you back because I want to talk about some of the solutions that you're seeing, some of the conversations,
Sure.
how programs can use what you're doing, why and how they should be. There's so much I want to talk to you about. So I'm
Yeah.
definitely, you got to come back so we can
I'm
finish this conversation.
happy to do that.
We just graduated our last cohort of our program for our past federal grant on Saturday. 85 dads in that cohort, 15 of them out of Fulton County Jail. Many of them probably won't see home for another 15, 20 years, but we're focused on really trying to understand how to be a better father even in their current situation. But to your point, one of the most beautiful things that I experienced on Saturday was having some of the mothers of the children of these guys and their mothers and family come up to me afterwards and say, you have no idea how much he has changed over the last 2 or 3 months, that he's like a different person.
Yeah.
Like that's the
Yeah.
ultimate like evidence that what you're doing is working, when people come up and say,
Yes.
no, my life or our lives and everybody's life as a result of that has changed.
That's beautiful. That's great. That's why we do it, for the same reason. That's what matters to me. And to get that family, the guy's feedback is great. The family's members is something above and beyond, because it's real.
Right.
You don't, somebody could be. We often aren't the best judge of ourselves, right? But to get those other people saying he's different, and that matters to me. It matters to him, and it matters to them, and that matters. That was keep me going. So that's great.
Yeah. He is David Mandel, and his book, Stop Blaming Mothers and Ignoring Fathers. And we didn't even get to the ignoring fathers part. We got to
I
come back
know.
and hit the
I
ignoring
will come
fathers.
back in a heart. We did talk about it some, Ken, but I will come back anytime you ask me.
Tell people how they can get the book, how they can learn more about the Safe and Together model and other things with
Yeah.
respect to the work that you're doing.
You go to our website. It's the easiest thing, safeandtogetherinstitute.com. From there, you can learn about our trainings. You can go to our virtual academy to take e-courses, including working with men as parents. There's a whole course specifically on fathers and male parental development. E-learning, you can access it right now. Our tools are there. And from there, you can actually buy my book, which is also available on Amazon. So those are that. And listen to our podcast, Partner with a Survivor. That's Ruth and I doing interviews. Ken, we'll have to get you on there so we can return the favor, because you'd be a great guest on there. But check it out on Spotify, wherever else you are, but Partnered with a Survivor.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you. And I got to get you have been to some places that are on my bucket list around the world that I haven't been yet. I think you've been on one side of the earth. I've been on the other side of the earth. I've been Mongolia, Indonesia,
Oh, nice. No, I haven't been
Colombia.
those places. Yeah.
You haven't done those yet?
No, we have to
Yeah.
swap stories, because I've been to I've been to 6 continents, everything except Antarctica, which is on my list.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm that don't do nothing for me.
My wife is like, you can go down that one by yourself.
See
It's
you.
like,
Call
yeah,
me when
exactly.
you get back. Yeah, you could do that one on your own. I'm
That's
good.
right. That's right.
And so, to all my I Am Dad podcast listeners, thank you so much for listening. You know how I like to leave you. Always be kind to others as you are kind to yourself, or you might find yourself by yourself. Always shoot high for your goals, because even if you miss, you'll be amongst the stars. And that's my good friend and mentor, Art Mitchell, used to always say to me, Kenny, it's nice to be important, but you know what? It's much more important to be nice. Till next Sunday, God bless, take care, be easy, and peace out.
Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. You've been listening to I Am Dad podcast. We hope that you have been informed, encouraged you to think, or even inspired your heart for the love of dads. The conversation does not end here. Come back and join us next week. Same time, same place. Or you can continue the dialogue on our I Am Dad Facebook page. We also invite you to listen to past episodes, learn more about us, and keep up with special activities by visiting IamDadPodcast.com. That's IamDadPodcast.com. Until next time, I leave you with this reminder of manhood from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Because of this reminder, I will always understand that I am dad, period.